The Kythera had ruled the galaxy for 3,000 years when humanity first stumbled into their space. Their ships were sleek silver crescents that moved like liquid mercury through the void, powered by technologies that bent reality itself. They had seen countless species rise and fall, had watched civilizations bloom and wither like flowers in an eternal garden. To them, most younger races were children playing with dangerous toys. Captain Elena Rodriguez remembered the first contact like it was yesterday, though 15 years had passed since that fateful day. Her exploration vessel, the Pioneer's Dream, had been conducting routine surveys near the edge of human space when reality simply twisted. One moment they were cataloging a dead system. The next, they found themselves facing a Kythera dreadnought that dwarfed their ship like a cathedral next to a pebble. The Kythera commander who appeared on their screens was tall and graceful, with skin that seemed to shimmer between silver and blue. Their eyes held the weight of millennia, ancient beyond measure yet filled with a strange kindness. When they spoke, their voice carried harmonics that seemed to resonate in the very atoms around them. "Young ones," the commander had said, their translator somehow making the alien words feel like music. "You have wandered far from your nursery. We are the Kythera, shepherds of this galaxy. Tell us, what are you called?" Elena had straightened in her captain's chair, trying to project confidence despite the overwhelming presence before them. "I am Captain Elena Rodriguez, of the United Earth Alliance vessel Pioneer's Dream. We are human." The Kythera commander's expression had shifted then, something like recognition flickering across their features. "Human," they repeated, as if testing the word. O and L, wide L, 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 L. "Yes. We have heard whispers of your kind, the young race that burns bright and brief like stellar fire, the ones who reach for stars before they have learned to walk among them safely." What followed was humanity's introduction to galactic civilization, and it was nothing like the science fiction stories had predicted. There was no invasion, no war, no dramatic standoff. Instead, the Kythera simply adopted them. Like patient teachers with particularly energetic students, they began to guide humanity's development. The first gift was medical technology that eliminated most diseases and extended human lifespan to nearly 2 centuries. The second was clean energy that made fossil fuels obsolete overnight. The third was faster-than-light communication that connected Earth's scattered colonies in an instant. Each gift came with gentle instruction, like a parent teaching a child to use scissors without cutting themselves. But humanity, as always, proved to be complicated students. Within 5 years of first contact, human pirates were using modified Kythera technology to raid shipping lanes. Human corporations were reverse engineering their gifts to create weapons the Kythera had never imagined. Human governments were using the extended lifespans to entrench corrupt dynasties that should have died out generations ago. The Kythera watched all of this with the patient sorrow of teachers watching their favorite student fail. They sent diplomatic missions, offered guidance, even intervened directly in some of the worst cases. But they maintained their fundamental principle. Every species must choose its own path, even if that path led to self-destruction. Elena, now an admiral in the Earth Defense Force, had been present at the Kythera Council when humanity's fate was finally debated. The Grand Chamber was a marvel of impossible architecture, where gravity seemed to flow like water and the walls showed views of distant nebulae. Hundreds of Kythera representatives gathered, their silver forms creating patterns that spoke of deep thought and deeper concern. They were given healing, and they created biological weapons, said one representative, their voice heavy with disappointment. They were given clean energy, and they built planet crackers. They were given the gift of long life, and they used it to make their cruelties eternal. Another stood, their form rippling with what Elena had learned was anger among the Kythera. "The Terrans have corrupted every gift we have offered. They are like a virus in our galaxy, spreading violence and chaos wherever they go. Perhaps it is time we considered containment." The word sent chills through Elena's spine. She had seen Kythera containment zones, systems where rebellious species were locked away behind barriers of twisted space-time, cut off from the rest of the galaxy until they either evolved beyond their violent nature or destroyed themselves in isolation. But then the eldest of the Kythera rose, their form so ancient that it seemed to be made more of starlight than matter. When they spoke, their voice carried the authority of eons. "I have lived through the rise and fall of 1,000 species," they said, their words echoing in dimensions Elena couldn't perceive. "I have seen the Marek consume their own moons in endless wars. I have watched the Zephyrite poison their entire sector rather than accept peace with their neighbors. I have observed species that made humanity's worst excesses look like children's games." The Ancient One turned toward Elena's observation platform, and for a moment their eyes met across impossible distance. "But I have also seen redemption. I have watched violent races learn wisdom, seen destroyers become protectors. The universe is vast and patient, and change comes to all things in time. The humans have indeed misused our gifts," the elder continued, turning back to the assembly. "But they are young, barely 10,000 years old as a species. They are still learning to walk among the stars. We who have guided a galaxy for millennia should not abandon hope for one difficult child." The debate continued for what Elena later learned was several days, though within the council chamber time seemed to flow differently. Representatives spoke of humanity's crimes and potential, of the risks and rewards of continued patience. Some called for immediate containment. Others suggested selective intervention, perhaps removing the most dangerous human leaders or technologies. But in the end, it was the Ancient One's voice that carried the day. "We will forgive them this once," the elder declared, their words rippling through dimensions. "We will clean up their messes, heal the wounds they have created, and restore what they have broken. We will give them one final gift, the chance to prove they can grow beyond their current nature." 2. Elena felt tears streaming down her face, though she couldn't say if they were from relief or shame. Around her, other human observers sat in stunned silence as the weight of the Kythera's mercy settled upon them. "But let it be known," the Ancient One continued, their form blazing with stellar fire, "that this forgiveness comes with a price. Humanity will be watched. Every action will be weighed, and if they prove themselves unworthy of the trust we place in them today, there will be no second chance." The council chamber fell silent, the decision made. The Kythera would repair the damage humanity had caused, and there was a lot of it. Poisoned worlds would be cleansed, destroyed stations rebuilt, the dead brought back where their technology allowed. Pirates would find their stolen ships simply stop working. Corrupt governments would discover their grip on power, mysteriously weakening as their Kythera-derived technologies began to fail. But most importantly, humanity would be given clear boundaries. Certain technologies would be locked away until they proved mature enough to handle them. Certain regions of space would be declared off-limits, and every human ship would carry a Kythera observer, not as a spy or warden, but as a teacher, there to guide them toward better choices. Elena remembered standing on the observation deck as the Kythera ships began their work. Across human space, miracles were occurring. Dead worlds bloomed with new life. Broken families were reunited with loved ones thought lost forever. The scars of humanity's mistakes were being healed with technologies that seemed more like magic than science. But she also remembered the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders, and on the shoulders of every human who understood what had just occurred. They had been forgiven, but forgiveness was not permission to continue making the same mistakes. It was an opportunity to become something better. The question now was whether humanity would prove worthy of the trust the Kythera had placed in them, or whether this would indeed be the last chance they would ever receive. As Elena watched the silver ships work their wonders across the stars, she made a silent promise to herself and to the ancient beings who had shown such incredible mercy. Humanity would not waste this gift. Whatever it took, whatever sacrifices had to be made, they would prove themselves worthy of the Kythera's faith. The first test of that promise would come sooner than anyone expected, and from a direction no one could have predicted. In the vast darkness between galaxies, something ancient and hungry had noticed the light of civilization, and it was coming to feed. But for now, in this moment of grace and second chances, Elena allowed herself to feel hope. The Kythera had forgiven humanity once, had given them the opportunity to become something greater than they were. Whether they succeeded or failed would determine not just the fate of humanity, but perhaps the fate of the galaxy itself. The silver ships continued their work among the stars, patient and benevolent, while across human space, an entire species began the difficult work of proving themselves worthy of forgiveness. The Devourer fleet emerged from the void between galaxies like a plague of metal locusts, their ships dark as the space between stars and hungry for the light of civilization. They had consumed 17 galaxies in their endless journey across the universe, leaving nothing but cold darkness in their wake. Each ship was a kilometer-long predator designed for one purpose: to strip every form of energy from every living world they encountered. Admiral Elena Rodriguez stood in the command center of humanity's newest flagship, the Second Chance, watching the long-range sensors paint a picture of approaching doom. 3 years had passed since the Kythera's forgiveness, and humanity had spent every day of those years trying to prove themselves worthy of that gift. The results had been mixed, but promising. The human pirates had been largely brought under control, not through force, but through opportunity. The Earth Defense Force had created a new branch, called the Pathfinders, offering former criminals the chance to explore dangerous regions of space in exchange for clean records and steady pay. Many of the most notorious pirates had become some of humanity's best scouts and first contact specialists. Corporate abuse of Kythera technology had been curtailed through careful monitoring and the simple fact that the technology stopped working when used for harmful purposes. Instead of fighting this limitation, human engineers had learned to work within it, creating innovations that were sometimes more elegant than the original Kythera designs. The corrupt governments had been the hardest problem to solve, but even there, progress had been made. When life extension technology was coupled with accountability measures that made leaders face the long-term consequences of their actions, many had chosen to rule more wisely. Others had simply chosen to retire rather than face centuries of living with their mistakes. But now all of that progress hung in the balance as the Devourer fleet approached the galaxy's edge. Elena's communications officer looked up from her station, her face pale with the magnitude of what she was about to report. "Admiral, we're receiving a priority transmission from the Kythera High Command. They're requesting immediate conference with all senior human military leaders." Minutes later, Elena found herself standing in a holographic conference chamber alongside the leaders of every major human military force. The technology was Kythera, of course, allowing instant communication across thousands of light years, as if they were all standing in the same room. The ancient Kythera elder who had spoken for humanity's forgiveness materialized before them, but their usual calm demeanor was replaced by something Elena had never seen before: fear. "The Devourer fleet has arrived," the elder said without preamble. "They number in the millions of ships and have already begun consuming the outer rim worlds. Every civilization they encounter is stripped of all energy and life within hours. We estimate they will reach the core worlds within 6 months." Admiral Chen, commander of the Mars Defense Grid, stepped forward. "What can we do to help? Our fleets are at your disposal." The elder's form rippled with what Elena recognized as deep sadness. "The Kythera military stands at 12 million vessels, supported by our allied species fleets, totaling another 8 million ships. In our 3,000-year history, we have never faced a threat that required our full military might." Elena felt a cold weight settling in her stomach. "And it won't be enough, will it? Our projections suggest we can destroy perhaps 60% of the Devourer fleet before our forces are overwhelmed. The survivors would still number in the millions, more than enough to consume this entire galaxy." The conference chamber fell silent as the implications sank in. Admiral Torres from the Luna Command spoke up, her voice barely above a whisper. "How long do we have? The outer defenses will hold for perhaps 2 months. After that, the Devourers will begin their advance toward the core systems. Evacuation of essential populations to other galaxies has already begun, but we can save less than 1% of galactic civilization. Elena found herself speaking before she had consciously decided to do so. There has to be another way. Some weakness we can exploit, some strategy we haven't considered. The Elder's ancient eyes focused on her with something that might have been hope. There is one possibility, but it would require unprecedented cooperation between our species. And it would demand sacrifices that may be too great to ask. Tell us, Elena said simply. What the Elder revealed changed everything Elena thought she knew about both the Kythera and the approaching threat. The Devourer fleet wasn't simply a military force. It was a living organism on a galactic scale. Each ship was a cell in a vast distributed intelligence that thought in terms of eons rather than moments. It had consumed 17 galaxies not out of malice, but out of a fundamental need to feed and grow. It was less an army than a force of nature, but like any living thing, it had vulnerabilities. The fleet's distributed consciousness requires constant communication between its components, the Elder explained. If that communication could be disrupted on a massive scale, the individual ships would become confused, disoriented. They might even begin attacking each other as their unified purpose breaks down. Admiral Rodriguez, Elena's counterpart from the Titan Defense Force, leaned forward. What kind of disruption are we talking about? Some sort of jamming technology? Not jamming, the Elder said. Their form beginning to pulse with patterns Elena had learned indicated deep thought. The Devourers communicate through quantum entanglement on a scale we have never attempted to match. Disrupting it would require creating quantum interference across an area the size of a solar system and maintaining that interference for several hours while our fleets destroy the confused ships. The technology existed, the Elder explained. The Kythera had theoretical designs for quantum disruptors powerful enough to affect an area that large. But they had never built them because the energy requirements were staggering. It would take the combined output of every fusion reactor in the galaxy running at full power for 72 hours straight. And that was where humanity came in. Your species has something ours does not, the Elder continued. Desperation paired with ingenuity. You take impossible problems and find solutions no rational being would attempt. We need that now. Elena studied the technical specifications the Elder was projecting into the chamber. The quantum disruptors would need to be built from scratch, using resources that didn't exist in sufficient quantities. They would need to be deployed in perfect coordination across thousands of light years. And they would need to be powered by an energy grid that had never been attempted on such a scale. It was, by any reasonable measure, impossible. How long do we have to build this? She asked. 6 weeks for construction, then 2 weeks to deploy and test the systems before the fleet reaches the disruption zone. Elena looked around at her fellow commanders and saw her own thoughts reflected in their faces. 8 weeks to accomplish something that should take 8 years. Using technology that didn't exist, powered by energy sources that would have to be jury-rigged from civilian infrastructure across the entire galaxy. We'll need complete access to Kythera manufacturing facilities, Admiral Chen said, already working through the logistics in his head. And we'll need your people to work alongside our engineers. You'll have it, the Elder replied immediately. This crisis has moved far beyond questions of technological sharing agreements. Loading. Thanks for watching. And offload. I'm Cian with Ness. Admiral Torres was studying the power requirements with the eye of someone who had spent her career managing energy grids. We can tap into the solar collection networks around every star in human space. But we'll need to completely rebuild the distribution systems. And we'll need every civilian reactor converted to military specifications. The Pathfinder Corps can handle the deployment, Elena said, thinking of humanity's former pirates and their talent for getting into impossible places. If anyone can place these disruptors in the right positions under combat conditions, it's them. The next 6 weeks became a blur of activity that pushed both human and Kythera capabilities far beyond their normal limits. In orbital shipyards around every major star, construction crews worked around the clock, building quantum disruptors from designs that were being modified and improved in real time. Human engineers worked alongside Kythera scientists, each group learning from the other's approach to impossible problems. The energy grid construction was a marvel of improvised engineering. Solar collection satellites were retasked and linked together in chains that stretched across multiple star systems. Civilian power plants were militarized overnight, their safety protocols stripped away in favor of maximum output. Emergency power storage systems were constructed in asteroid belts and planetary rings, ready to release decades' worth of stored energy in a single coordinated burst. Meanwhile, the Pathfinder Corps began the dangerous work of deploying disruptors in the path of the approaching fleet. These were former criminals who had learned to operate in the most dangerous regions of space, and they took to the mission with a fierce pride. They knew they were humanity's chance to prove their worth to the galaxy, and they weren't going to waste it. Elena found herself working 18-hour days, coordinating between human and Kythera forces while keeping track of construction progress and fleet movements. She barely slept, living on stimulants and determination. Around her, the entire galaxy was mobilizing for a battle unlike anything in recorded history. But as the deadline approached, it became clear that the impossible was becoming merely improbable. The disruptors were being built ahead of schedule. The energy grid was coming together faster than anyone had dared hope. The deployment teams were exceeding every expectation. With 1 week remaining before the fleet's arrival, Elena stood in the same conference chamber where the mission had begun. But now she was surrounded by both human and Kythera commanders working as a unified force. "Final deployment is complete," reported Commander Walsh, leader of the Pathfinder Corps. "All disruptors are in position and testing nominal. We lost 3 ships during placement, but the crews were evacuated successfully." The Kythera Tactical Coordinator, a being whose name Elena couldn't pronounce, but who had become a close colleague, rippled with satisfaction. "Energy grid synchronization is at 97% efficiency. All sectors report ready for coordinated discharge." Elena looked at the tactical display showing the approaching Devourer fleet, still days away but growing larger every hour. Soon they would know if 8 weeks of impossible work had been enough, or if this would be the galaxy's final battle. The ancient elder's voice filled the chamber one last time before the battle began. "Whatever happens in the coming days, know that you have already achieved something remarkable. 2 species that barely knew each other 8 weeks ago have worked together to attempt the impossible. That cooperation, that hope in the face of certain doom, is already a victory worth celebrating." Elena nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility and the pride of accomplishment in equal measure. Humanity had been forgiven once for their mistakes and given a chance to prove themselves. Now, as the dark ships of the Devourer fleet approached, they would discover whether they had proven worthy of that forgiveness, and whether they could become the allies the galaxy needed in its darkest hour. The final test was about to begin. The Devourer fleet struck the outer perimeter of the galaxy like a wave of darkness consuming light itself. Elena Rodriguez watched from the bridge of the Second Chance as entire star systems went dark on the tactical display, their energy stripped away in a matter of hours. The fleet moved with the inexorable certainty of entropy itself, each ship a kilometer of hunger wrapped in metal and malice. But this time, the galaxy was ready. The first phase of the defense began exactly as planned. Kythera and allied fleets engaged the Devourers at maximum range, using hit-and-run tactics to draw them toward the carefully prepared disruption zone. It was a fighting retreat that cost thousands of ships, but every hour bought was precious time for the final preparations. Elena's role in the battle was coordination. Standing at the center of a communications web that linked human Pathfinder teams, Kythera tactical units, and the massive energy grid that would power their desperate gambit. Around her, the bridge of the Second Chance hummed with activity as officers from a dozen species worked together with the fluid precision that had developed over 8 weeks of intensive preparation. "Pathfinder Team 7 reports successful disruptor activation," called out Lieutenant Santos from the communications station. "That's 80% of the grid online and ready." Commander Walsh's voice crackled over the tactical comm. "Pathfinder 1 to command. We're seeing the first Devourer scout elements entering the disruption zone. They're moving in standard formation. No sign they've detected our preparations. Elena felt her heart rate increase. Everything depended on the next few hours. If the quantum disruption worked, the Devour fleet's distributed consciousness would collapse, turning a unified force into millions of confused individual ships that could be destroyed piecemeal. If it didn't work, the galaxy was doomed. The ancient Kythera elder appeared as a hologram beside Elena's command station. Their form more translucent than usual, due to the massive power draw of the disruption grid. Admiral Rodriguez, all Kythera forces report ready for the coordinated strike. The moment the disruption begins, our fleets will converge on the confused ships from all vectors. Elena nodded, then opened a channel to every ship in the combined human Kythera fleet. All units. This is Admiral Rodriguez. In 10 minutes, we will attempt something that has never been tried before in galactic history. We're going to take down an enemy that has consumed 17 galaxies, using technology we built in 8 weeks and powered by the combined energy of an entire spiral arm. She paused, looking around at the faces of her crew, seeing the mixture of fear and determination that had become humanity's signature emotion over the past 3 years. The Kythera forgave us once for our mistakes and gave us a chance to prove ourselves worthy of their trust. Today, we show them, and the galaxy, what humanity can become when we fight not for conquest or glory, but to protect something greater than ourselves. The countdown began. Elena watched as energy readings across the galaxy climbed toward levels that should have been impossible. Every solar collector satellite, every fusion reactor, every power storage facility was channeling its output into the massive quantum disruptors hidden throughout the disruption zone. At 60 seconds, the first wave of Devourer ships entered the target area, their dark hulls drinking in the starlight around them. Elena could see on the tactical display how they moved, not like individual ships, but like organs in a vast body, each one aware of its place in a greater whole. At 30 seconds, Elena gave the final order. All Pathfinder teams, begin quantum disruption sequence. All fleet units, prepare for coordinated strike. At 0, the universe screamed. Elena had thought she understood what they were attempting, but the reality of the quantum disruption was beyond anything she had imagined. Space itself seemed to twist and bend as massive amounts of energy were converted into interference patterns that attacked the very fabric of quantum entanglement. Reality flickered like a faulty hologram as the disruptors tore holes in the communication network that had held the Devourer fleet together for millions of years. The effect on the fleet was immediate and devastating. Ships that had moved in perfect coordination suddenly began wandering aimlessly. Some stopped dead in space, their crews apparently stunned by the sudden loss of the collective consciousness they had never known life without. Others began firing randomly, sometimes at empty space, sometimes at their own companions. "It's working!" Lieutenant Santos shouted over the chaos of alarms and status reports. "The disruption is holding steady across the entire grid." It's ruption, but Elena barely heard her. She was watching the tactical display as the largest military operation in galactic history began to unfold. 20 million allied ships, human and Kythera, working in perfect coordination, swept down on the confused Devourer fleet like avenging angels. The battle that followed was unlike anything in recorded history. The Devourer ships, individually formidable but now cut off from their collective intelligence, fought with the desperate confusion of cells separated from their body. Some tried to flee, only to run directly into waiting ambush fleets. Others clustered together for protection, making themselves perfect targets for concentrated bombardment. Elena watched human Pathfinder ships dart between the massive Devourer vessels like minnows among whales, their former experience as pirates serving them well as they struck at vulnerable points identified by Kythera tactical analysis. She saw Kythera dreadnoughts use their reality-bending weapons to tear holes in space itself, swallowing entire Devourer formations in tiers in the fabric of existence. But it was the coordination between the two species that truly made the difference. Human ingenuity and adaptability combined with Kythera precision and advanced technology created a fighting force that was greater than the sum of its parts. Where human ships couldn't penetrate Devourer armor, Kythera weapons opened the way. Where Kythera targeting systems couldn't lock onto fast-moving targets, human pilots provided the precision strikes needed. The battle raged for 6 hours, and when it finally ended, the disruption zone was filled with the debris of the Devourer fleet. Of the 3 million ships that had entered the trap, fewer than 50,000 survived to flee into the dark space between galaxies. Elena stood in the aftermath, surrounded by cheering bridge crews and congratulatory messages from across the galaxy. But her attention was focused on a single transmission coming through on the command channel. It was from the ancient Kythera Elder, but their voice carried harmonics Elena had never heard before. Something that might have been pride mixed with wonder. Admiral Rodriguez, in my 3,000 years of life, I have seen many species prove themselves in times of crisis. But I have never seen anything like what your people accomplished today. You were asked to help solve an impossible problem, and you didn't just solve it. You revolutionized how we think about what's possible. Elena felt tears running down her cheeks as the full magnitude of what they had achieved began to sink in. Not just the military victory, though that was certainly important, but the fact that humanity had been given a second chance and had used it to save the entire galaxy. Over the following days, as the combined fleets began the long process of hunting down the surviving Devourer ships, Elena learned just how completely the battle had changed humanity's place in galactic civilization. The quantum disruption technology, originally designed as a desperate weapon, was being adapted for peaceful purposes. The energy grid that had powered it was being converted into a galactic communication and transportation network. The cooperation between human and Kythera forces was being formalized into permanent joint commands. But most importantly, the forgiveness the Kythera had offered 3 years ago was being replaced by something far greater. Genuine respect and partnership. Elena found herself standing in the same Kythera council chamber where humanity's fate had been debated. But this time, she wasn't an observer. She was there as an equal, representing humanity in discussions about the galaxy's future. The ancient elder who had spoken for humanity's forgiveness rose to address the assembly, their form blazing with stellar fire as they began to speak. 3 years ago, we debated whether humanity deserved a second chance. Today, I stand before you to say that question is no longer relevant. The humans have proven themselves not just worthy of forgiveness, but worthy of our highest respect. The elder gestured toward Elena, and she felt the weight of hundreds of ancient gazes settling upon her. They were given an impossible task with insufficient time and resources, and they accomplished it through pure determination and ingenuity. They took technologies we had developed over millennia and improved them in a matter of weeks. They coordinated a defense of the entire galaxy using crews that barely knew each other's names. But most importantly, the elder continued, their voice carrying across dimensions. They did all of this, not for their own glory, but to protect civilizations they had never met, species they barely knew existed. They fought not as conquerors seeking territory, but as guardians protecting something precious. The Ancient One turned directly to Elena, and she saw something in their eyes that took her breath away. It wasn't the patient tolerance of an adult watching children play, or the cautious hope of a teacher with difficult students. It was the recognition of one equal acknowledging another. From this day forward, let it be known throughout the galaxy that humanity stands among the great species of this age. They came to us as children seeking guidance, and they leave as allies we are proud to call friends. Their name will be spoken with respect in every system, their deeds remembered as long as stars burn in the sky. The council chamber erupted in harmonics that Elena's translator couldn't fully parse, but she didn't need translation to understand. It was applause, celebration, and welcome, all rolled into one. As she stood there, surrounded by beings who had ruled the galaxy since before her species had discovered fire, Elena thought about the journey that had brought them to this moment. Humanity had been forgiven once for their mistakes, given a second chance to prove themselves worthy of trust. They had taken that chance and made the name of their species legendary. But Elena knew this was not an ending, it was a beginning. Humanity had proven they could be trusted with great power and great responsibility. Now they would have the opportunity to help guide the galaxy's future, to be teachers and protectors for the younger species who would come after them. As she left the council chamber to return to the fleet, Elena made another silent promise. Humanity had been forgiven once, and had used that forgiveness to become something greater. Now, they would pay that gift forward, offering the same patience and hope to others that the Kythera had once offered to them. The galaxy was vast and full of wonders yet to be discovered. And humanity, no longer children stumbling in the dark, but full partners in galactic civilization, would help explore them all. In years to come, when other young species made their first tentative steps into the greater galaxy, they would hear the story of humanity's second chance. They would learn how forgiveness and cooperation could transform even the most unlikely species into heroes. And they would know that no matter how dark the threats that emerged from the spaces between stars, there were those who would stand guard against the darkness. The Kythera had forgiven humanity once, and in return, humanity had made their name legendary throughout the stars.